Greetings all, Ferrariman 601 here. Last week, VRC released this, the McLaren MP4 22 in point .3 beta. Now, exactly 1 year ago, I did a fully fledged review piece on this very car, VRC, McLaren MP4 22. However, that was version .1. That was the most primordial of primordial ooze version of this car. In the year that has followed, VRC have not forgotten about this project, although they have brought us many more fantastic late model Formula One cars, the Ferrari F2007, the Renault R25, the McLaren MP4 20, all of them are 100% brilliant. However, VRC very quietly behind the scenes have been reworking the MP4 22, and they continue to do so as you're watching right now. This is version .3 beta, so this is now 2 versions removed from version .1. However, it is still nowhere near 1.0. For this version of the car, VRC have essentially rebuilt the entire thing from the ground up. We have a new 3D model, we have new shaders, new textures, new shadow maps, new everything for the most part on this MP4 22. The initial version of this car in .1 beta, if you watch my first review of this car, I do very much recommend that you watch that, as this video is basically a sequel and development thereupon. However, the initial version of this car impressed me so much that I could not really find any way that VRC could possibly improve this thing. However, I was very much mistaken. A complete redesign from the ground up has yielded version .3, and it is even better than the initial .1 beta, which I thought was perfect right then and there. It's only gotten more perfect in the year that has elapsed between these two videos, and I really cannot even begin to fathom what we're going to see in 1.0 eventually when that does come out. However, as it has been a little while since we have talked about this car, this is going to be a full-on review piece in the same spirit as the original video that I made about this car a year ago. So we're going to go into the car's history, the technical specifications, we're going to gawk at the modeling and texturing details here in showroom view, and then of course we're going to go and drive this car. First of all, the McLaren MP4 22. This is the car that McLaren International developed and raced for the 2007 Formula One season. Nigh on, well, actually now past 10 years ago, 2018. Update the brain there, Ferrari man. 11 years ago, this car was racing in Formula One, and I remember it back in the day, and I'm sure many of you remember it back in the day as well. It is so hard to believe sometimes how quickly time passes, because I still look at this car and it looks current to me. Anyway, designed by McLaren International in 2007 for the 2007 season, Pat Fry was the chief designer on the MP4 22. In terms of the chassis, we are talking mid-2000s, so it is 100% carbon. We've got a molded carbon fiber aluminum honeycomb composite monocoque. We have front and side impact structures. Of course, the FIA getting more and more stringent with their cockpit safety protections in the middle of the 2000s decade, and then one only really has to look at the 2007 Canadian Grand Prix for Robert Kubica's big accident there to see the fruits of all of that labor. Kubica basically unscathed from that massive accident, hitting a concrete barrier head-on at about 160 miles an hour. So these cars definitely were very, very safe. In terms of the suspension design on this car, and of course we'll take a closer look at this in a few moments, but we have double wishbone pushrod front and rear. That was par for the course in this era. None of those pull rod designs happening on the front or rear suspension quite yet. Ferrari would take until 2010, 2011, I believe, to start experimenting with a pull rod front suspension again, and then of course Red Bull started to play with the pull rod rear suspension to some great effect. But pushrod front and rear on this car in 2007. The engine. Oh yes, McLaren definitely wish for these days again. It's a Mercedes-Benz FO108T. Don't let the T confuse you, that's just a code designation for the engine. It is a naturally aspirated 2.4-liter V8. It revved to 19,000 RPM per the mandated rev limit back in 2007. We're producing about 800 horsepower, give or take. 2.4 liters displacement, 19,000 RPM. These were the days. That was the sound that we all grew to know and love, and unfortunately we have lost it since in Formula One. The transmission, it's a McLaren-designed 7-speed plus reverse semi-automatic, paddle shift, hand-operated clutch on the steering wheel, of course. We still have this today, albeit in the version of an 8-speed unit, but the general principle of the gearbox design still has not changed now 11 years on. The fuel and lubricants supplied by Mobil, and the tires are these Bridgestone Potenza grooved tires. Of course, controlled tires starting in 2007. The tire war between Bridgestone and Michelin had finally concluded, mostly because of what happened at Indianapolis in 2005, and Bridgestone became the sole tire supplier in Formula One, and this continued from 2007 all the way up to the end of the 2010 season, where then Pirelli took over, and we still have them today. Competition history here on the MP422. It was, of course, only entered by, at the time, Vodafone, McLaren, Mercedes, and you can see the title sponsor Vodafone very conspicuous there on the car. It was driven by Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. Alonso and Hamilton were both new arrivals to the team for 2007. In 2006, McLaren started the season by running Kimi Räikkönen and Juan Pablo Montoya. However, by mid-year, McLaren and Montoya parted ways amid much acrimony, bringing in Pedro de la Rosa to deputize for the Colombian for the balance of the season. For the end of 2006, Michael Schumacher announced his first retirement, thereby leaving Ferrari and leaving a seat vacant for Kimi Räikkönen, who would join the team in 2007 and there go on to win his first and still only world championship. Lewis Hamilton came into Formula One after being a McLaren protege for most of his life, quite honestly, and he finally made his Formula One debut in a McLaren in 2007, finishing a brilliant fourth on debut in the Australian Grand Prix. Or maybe it was third. Yeah, it was third. I remember. He scored podium finishes in his first 9 races. He finished third. He started fourth, I believe. Anyway, over the balance of the season's 17 races, the McLaren MP422 won 8 of them. It took pole position for 8 of them, and it scored fastest lap in 5 of them. However, when we look at the car's points totals, you will see a whole bunch of zeros. Now, why is this? Well, on the balance of the season, it's fairly clear that the MP422 and McLaren were probably the real Constructors' Championship winners. However, those of you who know the story of the 2007 Formula One season, please bear with me. However, what happened in 2007 was about midway through the season, it came to light that McLaren had been the illegal recipient of very sensitive, very top secret Ferrari technical data. This concerned the design and development of the 2006 car, the 248 F1, as well as the design and development of the 2007 car, the F2007. McLaren, via one of their technical guys, Mike Coughlin, who got the data via one of Ferrari's technical guys, Nigel Stepney, McLaren got a hold of this data, and then they designed the MP422 to be superior in pretty much every way to the Ferrari F2007. It wasn't so much that McLaren copied the Ferrari design, because when we look at the MP422 and the F2007, we really don't see too much, at very least superficially, of a resemblance. However, McLaren knew what Ferrari were going to build, and therefore they said, hey, we can one-up them, and we're going to go out and we're going to dominate this world championship. So that's exactly what they tried to do, and they very nearly did it. But midway through the season, that came out, and the FIA decided that they were going to exclude McLaren from the 2007 Constructors' Championship and fine the team $100 million. Absolutely enormous fine and absolutely enormous penalty, because of course all of those points for the Constructors' Championship really mean big sponsor dollars for the season that follows. So McLaren went from having numbers 1 and 2 on their cars in 2007 to having numbers 21 and 22 on their cars in 2008. So big hit that affected McLaren for a few seasons thereafter, both financially as well as just in terms of their prestige. Also on the driver front in 2007, Fernando Alonso went to McLaren seeing that they were going to be making an uptick in their form, and they had fought for the World Championship in 2005. Poor reliability meant that they didn't win it, but they had the fastest car on the balance of the season. 2006 was a particularly bad year for McLaren. It was their first winless season in a decade up to that point. 2005 fighting for the World Championship, in 2006 not even managing to win a single race. But Alonso, having won back-to-back championships with Renault, said, I want a new challenge. I'm going to McLaren. They're going to be great again, basically. And he says, let's do this. However, Lewis Hamilton, coming into the team as a Ron Dennis protege for all of his life, he was a lot quicker than Alonso, I think, was bargaining for, and those two started an intramural scrabble for the whole season. That came to a head in Hungary during a Q3 pit stop where Fernando Alonso just sat in his pit box for about 45 seconds to a minute, impeding the pit stop of Lewis Hamilton, who is stacked behind him, thus meaning that Lewis Hamilton couldn't get his fast lap in Q3. That was the writing on the wall to McLaren from Fernando Alonso, and also the writing on the wall to Fernando Alonso from McLaren, saying, hey, look, clean up your act or you're no longer wanted in this team. Alonso took the message. He left McLaren at the end of 2007, having just missed out on the World Championship himself, and he went back to Renault for another couple of seasons. Big, bad year for McLaren, 2007, despite having built an absolutely fantastic car, definitely the best of the field. However, enough of the car's competition history, enough of the technical specifications. Let's have a look at what VRC have done here on this completely revisited McLaren MP4 22. First off, we can see the same level of detail on this model externally that we saw all the way back a year ago in version 0.1. However, everything on this car just looks a little bit more spiffed up. The dimensions seem a bit tighter, and therefore, looking at some high-resolution pictures of this car from back in the day, they do seem a bit more accurate, I must say. The same texture work, the same modeling work that we saw in version 0.1 is still here, but it's been completely refined, and I must say the level of detail has only increased, if that was even possible, but there it is. You can see the new for 2007 Vodafone livery on this car, punctuated by the chrome. It's really reflective, and it's really, really nice. Of course, in 2006, McLaren debuted the silver and red paint scheme. They had Emirates as one of their main sponsors back in that day, and of course Emirates had the white lettering and red background on the front and rear wings. But Vodafone, honestly, it fits better with the car, and therefore we see it here. Getting really close up here on the front end of the car, you can see how basically everything stays incredibly crisp, no matter how close you get to it. You can see the little air intake there right on the tip of the nose. That's for cockpit cooling, to some degree anyway. Very, very sharp. I don't see any pixelation anywhere at all, really. And then looking at all the sponsorship logos on the front wing and on the nose cone itself, everything is very sharp, very crisp, and very correct in terms of its size and its placement. Very, very cool. Looking at the front wing design on this car, you can see just how complex it is. Completely different philosophy of wing design from what we see in 2017 and now 2018 Formula 1. We haven't seen the real cars yet, but we can get a good sense of what they're going to look like anyway. But in this era, the front wings were a lot narrower, but they were also a lot deeper in terms of their three-dimensional profile on the Z-axis going up and down. And you can see the center section of the wing swoops down from the end fences quite sharply to this level section underneath the nose cone. And this is what we used to call a spoon profile on the front wings. It was a loophole in the regulations, basically, because you had the height of the nose cone on the car, which was pretty much mandated by the regulations, but they really neglected to talk about the height of the front wing in that area. So what the team started to do was they put this bend in their front wings to get the center section of the wing as low as possible for some better airflow to the car's under tray. So we ended up with these spoon wings. The team started to experiment with this really in 2005 with the new regulations that were in that year for cutting some of the downforce, but the spoon profile really started to come out in 2006, and then really here in 2007 it became very much matured. If you remember back in 2005, the Ferrari F2005 had this secondary winglet underneath the main plane of the front wing, which was basically trying to emulate this spoon profile. Ferrari never really ran a spoon wing in 2005, but by 2006 it was on the 248 F1, so you could definitely see the beginnings of that all the way back in 2005. Also interesting on this wing, you can see this upper element. This was debuted by McLaren in 2007 at the Spanish Grand Prix. This is a bridge wing, we called it, and it was very controversial because this upper element of the wing used to flex quite severely at high speed. It wasn't a violent oscillation sort of flex, but you could definitely see at speed as the airflow increased over the wing and its velocity, you could definitely see the top section of that wing compress down toward the nose tip, and therefore it could lend itself some more aerodynamic efficiency. Ferrari started to protest this. Ferrari, of course, were quite experienced in running their own bridge wings. They debuted theirs all the way back in 2006 on the 248 F1, but McLaren didn't get on that bandwagon until 2007, and here it is. There was a protest, and the FIA issued a directive to McLaren saying you have to reinforce that bridge wing. So on later versions of this car, you will see just a little stay extending from the nose tip up to the center section of that bridge wing just to keep it from flexing so much. But it was successful, and I think it looks really cool as well. Looking across the front end now, you can see that double wishbone push rod suspension in all its glory. I like the updated carbon textures on these suspension elements. Looks very, very nice, and of course it looks totally correct. The lower and upper wishbones look nice. You can see the track rod and tie rod there on the upper element integrating the steering system, and the push rod itself going into the top of the chassis there. Very, very nice. Good brake duct detail as well, and then of course our wheel and tire detail. This even looks a bit spiffed up from version 0.1 beta. Everything just looks a bit sharper. The grooves there on the tires, the tread block, everything looks sharper. Nice crisp angles and edges there. I really like it. Tire sidewall, Bridgestone Potenza, of course. Very nice lettering on the sidewall. Not only the branding there, but you can see a barcode. You can see some embossed lettering there on the inner flange of the sidewall, if you will, and then going into the wheels. Very nice powder-coated black wheels with that wheel nut in there. You can see the safety pin that the mechanics would pull out after they had put the wheel on. Very cool. The valve stem and valve stem cover, nice detail there. And then inside you can see those carbon brakes with those calipers mounted down low for better center of gravity. Very cool. Midsection of the car, things start to get really complex here. If you look at the Ferrari F2007, you'll see similar treatments here in the center section of the front end. However, here is McLaren's interpretation. This is a later season variant of the car. I don't believe McLaren started the season with these canard wings here, running just above where you see those IGO logos there on the sides of the monocoque. But the F2007 debuted a very similar thing at the French Grand Prix that year, and McLaren, of course, had to follow suit. You can see very complicated and intricate barge board details now. The extreme lower elements of the front suspension, just below that, you can see some primary barge boards, and then as we move rears, you can see the main barge boards just below those IGO logos with the Johnny Walker logos on them, and then the floor. We have some floor extensions going out just slightly outboard of those Johnny Walker barge boards there, and then that then integrates the airflow into the floor, the reference plane on the car. McLaren would further develop this for 2008, but pretty much here this is the zenith of this 1995 to 2008 aero philosophy. Very, very cool. Moving midships, you can see these chimneys integrated with turning vanes. These chimneys started to pop up in 2004, 2005, just to help extract some hot air from the radiators and maybe add a little bit of downforce as well, but more so airflow conditioning as the air starts to flow toward the rear section of the car. But McLaren here have integrated them with some very nice turning vanes, really nicely modeled here from VRC. Of course, another feature on this car are these Viking horns on either side of the airbox. We saw these starting in 2005 on the MP420, and they continued all the way up through 2007 and 2008 here on the MP422 and MP423. Very cool. The rationale here, just streamline the airflow and clean it up a bit toward the rear wing to maximize the aero efficiency of that rear wing. Looking into the cockpit has been very nicely updated and detailed here on version 0.3. Very cool. We'll go in there in a moment, but you can see there that everything is looking very crisp indeed. Moving toward the rear section now, here is our left rear tire, and then here moving toward the rear end proper with the diffuser. Very nicely detailed here once again from VRC, and this is one of the areas where we can totally see that this car has been updated rather substantially since its initial version 0.1, guys, because there's so much more detail going on here now. Here on the rain light, which of course is operable. You can see now that we can see the fasteners that hold the rear lensing in place. Not only can you see the fasteners, but you can even see the pattern of the screw heads themselves. Really cool. Of course, the diffuser. We have, how many elements of this diffuser? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 elements here on this diffuser. Very cool. Of course, you can see the reference plane there. That is the lowest section of the floor, and as we move inboard toward the rear, you can see the multiple levels of this diffuser. The central tunnel, we have a little winglet there in the bottom section of the central tunnel, just where the overlay has come in. And as it goes away, that's the little winglet I'm talking about. Of course, we have the starter hole integrated with that. That hole there, the circular section off to the bottom right of the central tunnel, that's the starter hole. That's where you'd put an electric motor onto the back of the gearbox to spin the engine over. Very, very nicely done. The rear wing, very similar in its overall design to the front wing. You can see that deep dish spoon profile on the rear wing. Again, they're just trying to scoop up the airflow as much as possible for aero efficiency. Across the top side, you can see here somewhat of a similar profile to what we saw on the MP420 from 2 years earlier, but you can see those very menacing looking double exhausts coming out, one for each bank of cylinders, of course, on that V8 engine, and then very nice integration with the gearbox casing and rear crash structure. Very, very cool indeed. Over here on the shadowed side of the car, very deep, crisp, and wonderful reflections going on every which way here on that chrome bodywork. Absolutely love what VRC have done. However, we've got to go in the cockpit, so let's do that. We'll fly in here. And more or less here, this is the driving position. We'll be sitting a little bit farther forward, but this is pretty much the height we'll be sitting at. And you can definitely see that VRC have done a fantastic job here modeling the cockpit, all of the texturing, the placement of all the controls, the detail in general. It has moved up quite a few notches here from point 1 to point 3, and really, I've got to say, hats off to these guys. First off there, you can see the ignition is switched off, but we have the shift lights all lit up. Of course, they will light up sequentially from left to right as the revs go up, and it's time to grab another gear. Below that, you've got the 3 windows there for your display, so we'll have speed, we'll have gear in the center, and then on the right, we'll have fuel load in liters. The steering wheel itself looks pretty much the same in terms of its layout from point 1. However, you can definitely tell that the textures and overall meshes of everything have been cleaned up quite significantly. It's going down to the sides of the cockpit is where we really notice more detail. You can see now that we've got more switch gear. We've got more controls over on the right-hand side of the bulkhead, the fire switch, definitely some volume buttons there for the radio perhaps, maybe some heated visor stuff, and maybe some ancillary engine settings, but very nice rotary switch and knob detail. Moving down to the sides, you can see more buttons and switches there, probably for the radio system. Over down there on the right, you see another switch. Very cool. I've never really seen a good cockpit photo of the MP422, so I really can't say what all these controls are, but very nicely rendered here nonetheless from VRC. Looking around the sides of the car, you can see there, we can see the master kill switch for the ignition, and then the cockpit surround. Very nice reflections here, very nice detail. Looking down here at the rear of the bulkhead, you can see the driver's seat and the seat belts nicely integrated. Nice carbon detail there. Here's that cushion on the back of the cockpit surround to keep the driver's head from bouncing against the back of the car. And then, moving up, there is the air intake snorkel, complete with the T-bar. And right there, from our vantage point, on the right-hand side of the T-bar, from our vantage point, it's really on the left side, you can see that there is a camera lens in there. Very, very, very cool. Very much like that. Moving across now to the other side. Nice reflections once again. Definitely loving this car. Already VRC. And of course here, get a good sense of the sight lines. Again, we'll be sitting a little bit farther forward, but the height is pretty much where we will be. So you can see the tops of the tires, you can see the mirrors, and that's about it. You just peer over the fronts of these Formula One cars, but really, it's fantastic. We'll leave the cockpit now. And we'll just take one last look here at this tremendous McLaren MP422 here in 0.3 beta skies from VRC. It's absolutely tremendous just to look at, but of course, we do have to drive this thing, and we're going to take it to Silverstone this time around. So please strap in, make some snacks, and get ready to hear some wonderful 2.4-liter Mercedes V8 soundtrack as we drive the MP422 at Silverstone. We'll see you at Silverstone in just a moment. Welcome to Silverstone. Before we get out on track, of course, we're going to have a look through the setup screen and show you what's going on here on version 0.3 beta of VRC's McLaren MP422. Here on the gear display, we've got the entire gearbox, 1st through 7th gear, plus final drive, infinitely adjustable to your heart's content. These 2007 gearboxes really were impressive bits of kit. It was the first season that the entire field were running the so-called seamless shift gearboxes, meaning that the upshifts were happening anywhere between 7 and 10 milliseconds. Basically, all you hear is the engine changing revs. That's about it. The downshifts also are pretty much seamless. The only thing you notice is the auto blip from the engine when you pull the paddle. Then you're in the next gear. The tire screen. We've got 4 tire compounds to choose from. They're all those Bridgestone controlled groove compounds. However, the default here is the medium. We can choose the hard, medium, soft, or super soft. We'll be running the medium here for our purposes. Tire pressures default to 13 psi in the front and 12 psi in the rear. The lowest you can go is 11 psi, and the highest you can go, if you so desire it, is 15 psi. So you've got a pretty small window in which you can adjust those tire pressures. Do so accordingly. Fuel, zeroed out to keep the engine quiet. However, maximum fuel capacity in this car is 120 liters. Remember that refueling was a thing in 2007 Formula 1, so do plan your pit strategy accordingly. Electronics, we have traction control settings. Default is 5 out of 6. Of course, you can go all the way up to 1, and then you can turn the system off as well. And then your engine brake settings defaults to 6 out of 8. You can go all the way up to 8 out of 8 or 100%, and you can go down to 1 out of 8 if you so desire. Aero screen. Here's where things get interesting. Yes, we only have front and rear wing adjustments. However, watch the front wing as I make these downforce adjustments. Yes, you can see that the main plane changes its angle visually depending on what I'm doing with that downforce setting. Not many modding teams are doing this, but some of the better ones are beginning to do this, and VRC obviously have implemented this here on the MP422 in 0.3 beta spec. It's a really cool detail. I'm not sure that it matters for all that much, but it definitely is nice to see when a modding team decides to include this level of detail. The same is true on the rear wing. It's a little bit more difficult to see, but just watch the rear main plane now as I make those downforce adjustments. Zeroed out, and then as I round the downforce on, you can see the angle of attack get a little bit more severe on that main plane. It's not as easy to see on the rear wing as it is on the front, but the same holds true. The angle of attack changes there on the main plane. Very nice to see. Alignment, this is more traditional. Camber and toe on all 4 corners, default values shown. The dampers, your bump and rebound or bound and rebound, infinitely adjustable to your heart's content. Drivetrain, the differential settings in power coast and preload. Generic engine limiter defaults to 100%, which is its highest setting, but it can go all the way down to 95% if you so choose. Brake bias defaults to 55% to the front. Brake power at 100%, and then the steer assist, that's your power steering. Suspensions, anti-roll bars front and rear, heave springs, ride heights, wheel rates, all things of that nature here. Visual mods. This is the only other difference that we've got here on this 422 versus some other cars. We can make some adjustments to the aerodynamics of the car here. You see those fins that we talked about in showroom view on either side of the airbox. Watch them. Now they disappear. You see yes fins, no on the first menu here in the visual mod screen. Set it to 1, the fins are gone. Set it to 0, the fins are back again. I like the Viking horn, so we're going to run them. Front wing type, you can see here that we've got the Spain spec wing on this car with the bridge wing, but if we switch that to 1, the bridge wing goes away and we're just left with the main plane. This is more or less launch spec on this car. Australia, Malaysia, Bahrain, those races. And then if you want the Euro spec, there it is, the bridge wing. The other thing on this car, and it's the only error that I have spotted on this car so far, nose cone type. You can see this is the default setting 0, but if I go to set 1, you'll see that the shape of the nose cone changes. It's a bit more streamlined, it's a little bit lower, but have a look here where the car's number should be. The textures are a bit messed up. We should have the number 1 there, but we don't. We have some texture problems. But the shapes of everything and the rest of the textures on that new nose tip, very nice indeed. That is the only error that I have spotted on this car. Of course, you can run this nose cone with the bridge wing if you want. However, due to the texture anomalies, we're going to run this version of the nose, and we are going to run the bridge wing. That's about it in terms of what's going on here on the MP422. We are going to run a custom setup here. Show you a little bit of what's going on. Tire pressures are down to 11 psi. We're going to run the medium compound. Fuel, we're going to put some more gas in the tank, and then all of the other settings should be pretty well honed for Silverstone. Very nice. At any rate, in the cockpit now, the car is alive, the engine is running. You can see the shift lights across the top of the dash. They are blinking white. This indicates that the pit lane speed limiter is on. On the left-hand side of the LCD on the dashboard, you see that 0. That is our speed readout. It'll be in kilometers per hour. In the center, that is our gear display, showing N right now for neutral. It does display all the way up into 7th gear and then all the way back down through neutral and reverse. Over to the right, you see the 45L. That's our fuel level, 45 liters in the tank. The rest is status quo from showroom view, but you can see everything now in natural lighting conditions. It looks very nice indeed. 45 liters in the tank, the engine is running, the car is alive. Let's go out and see how this updated and renovated and renewed MP422 drives. Off of the limiter now, and on to the racetrack. Snatching the left front brake there as they're cold. We'll get some heat into the brakes and tires on this lap. Remember, we're running on the mediums. Full revs on that 2.4 liter Mercedes V8. 19,000 RPM or thereabout. Get some heat into the brakes here as we go into the infield complex. Car will wind out down the old start-finish straight here on the Grand Prix circuit. Copse corner will be very nearly flat in 7th gear once we are up to temperature, just being a bit cautious as we are on our warm-up lap. And down hanger straight. We'll pop 7th gear in a moment. There it is, over 300 clicks. Fuel load burns down. We will get faster here as well. Into stow. Down into the Vale complex. What today completes the lap here at Silverstone. Turn 1 here should be flat. It's not quite flat yet. It will be. Just completing the last bit of the tire warm-up at this point. Mediums take about a lap and a half to come up to temperature completely. The brakes now more or less feel like they're there. And Copse fast approaches. Dab a brake and pop a downshift through here. Again, as fuel load burns down, Copse is going to be pretty nearly flat in 7th. However, the car is now at a point where I'm happy with it. We can start talking about what it feels like. We're reasonably heavy on fuel right now, so the agility through the corners is a little bit diminished. However, initial impressions from this car, very positive indeed, just like they were on 0.1 beta a year ago. However, the first things that I notice in this car, 0.1 to 0.3 relatively speaking, is just generally how much more secure everything feels. This car has always felt good from a driving perspective. Turn 1's now flat, very nice. But now, having had another year to refine their designs and also gaining more experience working on other cars of a similar vintage, Renault R25 and the McLaren MP4 20, in a lot of ways you can think of the 420 as being this car's, in many ways, immediate predecessor, even though it's 2 years in arrears of this one. VRC definitely have gotten their heads around how these mid-2000s Formula 1 cars worked, how they were set up, what they should feel like, and what they should be able to do. And all of that design work definitely is now showing through on this improved MP4 22. I've got good confidence into the corners. I've got good confidence on the brakes already. The aero balance feels superb. Once you're up to speed and the downforce starts to build, there are no surprises at all. The car does not feel like it wants to swap ends on me through the corners. If it did, that would be a setup problem on my end. That would have nothing to do with the overall physics package on this car. Absolutely great control, great confidence immediately. In terms of how you interface with the car, with the steering, with the force feedback, everything feels very positive. Running the TSPC Thrustmaster with the Ferrari F150 wheel. The steering is light. It's not as light as the R25 though. One criticism I have of the R25 is that the steering is just a little bit too light. That is not the case in this car. It's manageable. The steering weight feels appropriate. However, the force feedback also very much feels appropriate. You definitely know where all four corners are at all times. Through some of the low-speed corners, the steering weight drops away a little bit. I think some of that may be down to some low-speed understeer in the setup, or perhaps it's just some of the general vagaries of these Bridgestone groove tires. And it's been a while since we've done extended running on these groove tires, so perhaps I've got to recalibrate my brain to deal with that sensation, but everything feels very appropriate from a force feedback standpoint. Big lift there through Cops, but 7th gear. In terms of the feel on the brakes, as we go down deep into snow, you'll see how the brake application works in this car. It's very brief and very fast. From 7th to 4th gear in about a second and a half. It is how it works. Lots of modulation required though on the brake pedal. It is easy to lock the front wheels in particular. Of course, you can dial that around a little bit with your brake bias settings in the cockpit. I can play with that a little bit. If anything, at the moment I'm dealing with a little bit of rear locking, and any front locking I get is just down to overuse of the brakes themselves. Dial the brake bias forward a little bit and see how that works here into the stadium complex. Slightly better. And then through Woodcote Corner, the power comes on very nicely in this car. It's extremely linear. The engine is very tractable. There are no torquey spots in the power curve from what I can discern. Everything feels very linear, very smooth. This engine is infinitely tractable. And we mentioned that gearbox sitting in the pit lane, but in practice it's even better. You can see just how quick those downshifts are. You've got The throttle cut and the throttle blip taken care of for you. No stabbing at the gas awkwardly on the downshifts. Everything is just very prim and proper and polished, like no mod is ever polished. As you've likely been able to divine by now, the visibility from the cockpit is good as it can be from one of these Formula One cars. Just the way that you just peer over the top of the bulkhead there. It's just par for the course. You can't see anything of your nose, you can't see anything of your front wing, but you do see the tops of the tires, and that allows you to sight the car around the corners. Decent visibility to the rear, and I could play with my field of view a little bit to get a little bit more view in the mirrors, but this is what I'm used to, and this is what I've been running for a very long time, so there it is. Decent enough visibility to the rear nonetheless. In terms of the car's electronic systems, the traction control, it works nicely. It's not too intrusive. 2007 was the last year for traction control in Formula One. In 2008, the standard ECU was brought in. Consequently, that ECU was manufactured by McLaren Electronic Systems. And one of the functions of that standard ECU was to police driver aids like traction control. So 07 was the last year for traction control in Formula One. Therefore, we are running it here, and you know, it runs very nicely. Missed my turn-in point a little bit. No problem. There are these low-speed corners. Get on the throttle hard. Let the computer take care of the wheel spin. Really no need to do my throttle blipping through the low or medium-speed corners. The computer does a good job. And through the high-speed corners, just lay on it. There's so much downforce, particularly on the rear. You can totally understand why this car was so successful, at least on track. On paper, its performances are pretty dismal for the reasons we described before. But there is no denying, despite whatever Ferrari DNA this car may or may not have, there is no denying how great it is. That traction control kicking in there as I get on the throttle hard through third gear. It responds well to wheel spin, it responds well to oversteer. Even getting a little bit out of shape over the exit curbing there, it is very planted. The sounds are also quite appropriate. The sounds have been updated a little bit over version 0.1. The sounds were already excellent in that version of the car. Here they're just cleaned up a little bit. They don't feel quite as poppy or foamy, if you will. You know what I'm talking about. If a sound is foamy, it just kind of has a lot of higher frequency crackles in it that just get annoying after a while. None of that whatsoever here. This engine more or less sounds like the onboard shots we got from back in 2007. And that's always really, really cool when a mod sounds just like its real-world counterpart, at least in the way in which we interfaced with its real-world counterpart. And for the, by and large, the vast majority of us, that was from watching it on TV, and it sounds very much like those onboard cameras from 2007. Very cool. $17 liters of fuel remaining. 16 now. Burning about 7 liters per lap. That's a lot of fuel consumption. Very wide there.
Tires feel good after having done a handful of laps. They're definitely well into their working temperature range. But they are consistent through their warm-up and the first bit of their stint. I don't feel any graining, really. I don't feel like they're washing away too much through the medium or high-speed corners. If anything, the car tends to suffer a little bit through the low-speed stuff, but honestly, it's all very manageable. You can play with your throttle application a little bit if you need to. You can play with your differential settings a little bit if you need a little bit more bite on turn-in for the low-speed stuff. But honestly, this feels very good. I could do this for a complete race distance if I wanted to. No problem. See the shift lights there on the dashboard? They react very quickly, depending on whatever the engine's doing. And because these cars pick up revs so fast, those shift lights just being there in your peripheral vision, that is sometimes your only cue as to when the most opportune moment is to change gear. Of course, you're listening to the engine all the while, but the revs come up so fast. Turn the traction control off for a moment. How does the car react now without the electronic aids? It's still very compliant. Just those bumps right before the braking point for a stow. It can get any car unsettled, and this one gets unsettled a little bit. It is just so stiff, as you would expect it to be. But it does completely rock your world over those bumps ever so slightly. Get the TC back up. And also just other things that you get to look at when you do have a quiet moment out here. Going down the straights, for example, you can have a look around the cockpit. All the texturing work has definitely been improved tremendously. We mentioned that VRC did pretty much a ground-up rebuild on the whole car in terms of the 3D model and in terms of a lot of the textures, and that is definitely evident here just from the cockpit. Everything in the cockpit is of a little bit of a higher quality carbon textures around the top of the bulkhead. We'll definitely see that once we're lit from behind. But right where you can see the fastener heads that are holding that little pseudo windscreen in place, you'll see a great carbon texture detail there. There it is, starting to come into view. Very nice. The LCD and the housing for that, everything is cleaned up significantly. The shift lights are now finally in a straight line again. They were on version 0.1, and version 0.2 kind of put this slight curve into everything, which was honestly a little bit unsettling, but all of that has now been retrofitted and corrected. Very nice. It's a big lockup. We've spoiled the front tires at this point. 3 liters of fuel on board. Will be coming in. And yep, there's our first spin of the day. Tires are definitely going off now. Just a little twitch in the medium speed corner. That's all it took to get the whole car unsettled. And even with traction control at that point, it wasn't going to bring itself back together. Gonna add a bit of gas. See how much fuel is required. 6 laps, 26 liters. We're gonna put the super soft tires on. I'm happy with the tire pressures. I'm happy with all of that. It's got 1 liter left as we come into the pit lane. Fuel consumption is a bit high. Got a little bit of fuel out. Nice pit crew detail, as you can see. And off we go for a run on Super Softs. You will notice, keen-eyed viewers, the Super Soft tire texture is not on this trim of the car. This is Alonso's livery. However, on Hamilton's livery, there are textures on those Super Soft tires. You will see the white stripe in that second-to-last groove on the fronts from our vantage point here, and on the rears as well, obviously. Already on the Super Soft, definitely a discernible increase in grip. Car felt fine on the mediums, it feels even finer now. That bite on turn-in, it's good. It's real good now. In the low-speed stuff that I was complaining about a little bit, definitely improved. Turn 1, flat, no problem. Pick up the apex, get on the power, wind it out in second, pick up the apex here as best we can. On the power early, let the traction control stamp out the wheel spin, and then hard on the gas all the way down into the complex. 7th gear under the bridge. Throttle gingerly. Out on the start finish, circa 2009. To Copse Corner. Bit of a lift over the exit curbs. Now getting ourselves lined up for Mackett's and Beckett's. Over the curbs a bit, let the downforce get all of that squared away. And already onto Anger Straight. The lap at Silverstone here, it's not particularly short, not particularly long either. It's about mid-range, but it goes by so quickly because there are so many high-speed corners here. One of those tracks that laps can just sort of accumulate, and you're not always entirely cognizant of how many laps you've done. and trying to get away from me a little bit. Try to keep it under control. Could probably do with a little bit more front downforce, but I'm not complaining. Not complaining at all. Right now this setup feels like a pretty decent compromise, actually. I think if I really wanted to trim the car out, specifically for Silverstone, I could be taking Cops flat, but I'm not entirely sure what that would do to straight line speed. Your cornering speeds and your straight line speeds are pretty much of equal importance around this place, because there are so many high-speed corners. Yes, that is the majority of when you're going to be picking up lap time, but straight line speed is also important around here. So it's always that game of compromise between how much wing do you add for the corners and how much wing do you leave off for the straights. The car feels a bit more settled this time around. We've knocked the new out of our super softs though. But on lower fuel, Cop's corner is a bit more manageable now. Using all of the racetrack there. This car will do it all day. And crossing the line here. Let's cool the car down. Take a moment to take in the scenery. Just have a look around in the cockpit. It's immaculate. It really is. And remember, this is point 3. Point 3. So assuming a base 10 counting system, the car is 30% complete. If this is 30%, what is 100? What more could they possibly do? I mean, let's see, we'll turn on the rear light and, well, you don't see any animations there. No switches being thrown in the cockpit to turn that rear light on. VRC on their McLaren MP4, they do have the rain light animation. You see the driver's hand go down below the dashboard and flip a switch. I mean, they could add that detail. If they really wanted to get creative, I suppose they could animate the driver's hands with the clutch application. I see no need to do any of that. But I mean, if they really wanted to, they could. I suppose they could also, in showroom view, make the car completely explode or something when you hit the space bar. Take off the engine cover, take off the wheels, take off all that. Sort of like RSS did with Formula Hybrid. But honestly, in real practice, what what else is there to do on this thing? It's complete. It really is complete as far as I'm concerned. And switching the engine off now. There's really there is no criticism that I could levy in this thing's direction that would be even in the least valid as far as I'm concerned. The only error on it is on that secondary nose cone with the textures being a little bit messed up. That's it. That's literally the only problem that I can find with this car. Everything about it, especially from a driving standpoint, is spot on. It is exactly what you would expect it to be. It goes well, it stops well, it turns well. The aero balance is superb. And then, of course, just looking at it here from external views, the detail, the texturing, the modeling, the sizes, the meshes, the sounds, everything is what you would want in an MP422. I can find no fault with it at all, and believe me, I'm trying. You know that I like VRC a lot, but at the same time, I try to be as objective as I can in these reviews, and honestly, objectively, trying to remove as much of my personal bias as I can. I cannot find anything really wrong with this car. The nose cone texture errors aside, that's not even close to being a deal breaker. Really, there's nothing wrong with it in the least. Really. That's it. It's amazing. It's amazingly well put together. VRC continue to go from strength to strength with all of these cars that they decide to bring to us, and they only have more in the pipeline. They've got an IndyCar mod coming our way. They're doing the DW12 in its 2012 guise as well as in its 2018 guise with the new aero specification that IndyCar is going to be bringing out, and that's going to be coming to us reasonably soon. They're still working on the McLaren MP4 They're still working on updates to the Renault R25, the Ferrari F2007, the McLaren MP420, the Williams FW19. The list goes on and on with these guys, and every single thing that they release for us is just superb. Really, none of their mods have any fatal flaws as far as I'm concerned. Occasionally you do run into something that's like, maybe they could do a little bit better job with that, but then you remember that it's point 1 or it's point 2, and they still are working on it. They still have a lot of time to redeem themselves. So honestly, I can't say enough good things about VRC. Everything that they do is absolutely world class, and I just can't thank them enough for the opportunity that they give to all of us to drive some of these fantastic Formula One cars, because we're not going to get these cars natively from Kunos anytime soon. Ferraris maybe, but McLarens, Williams, nope, not happening. Absolutely never going to happen, at least not in the immediate future. So really, this is the only way that we have to drive a lot of these cars, and it's fantastic. It really is. Links will be in the description for all of the VRC information. However, that concludes the commentated portion of this review. I do bid you all please stay tuned for the hot laps. We'll have them from onboard as well as external views here from Silverstone. However, until next time, I just want to thank you, all of you, very much for watching, for all of your continued support, engagement, your likes, your shares, your subscriptions. Thank you to those of you who interact with me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I really do appreciate it. I try to respond to as many of you as I can. And of course, here in the YouTube comments section, I do really appreciate the interaction that we get here day in and day out. So please keep those comments coming. I really do enjoy hearing from you, and I really do enjoy hearing your suggestions for future content as well. Until next time, though, thank you all very, very much for watching. Stay tuned for the Hot Laps. For Reimagined 601 saying thanks, and we will see you soon.